This is the Philanthropy Show, connecting and inspiring philanthropy.
Welcome to the Philanthropy Show. I am your host, Luann Saraga-Walters. So, have you asked yourself lately, how diverse is my board? And if you say, well, we're very diverse, we have different races and genders and sexual orientation and cultures, but what about age? Do you have any youth on your board? Well, now might be the time to figure that one out because, as we know from a past couple of shows, we have a new generation of millennials that is coming in, and our baby boomers who are currently on our boards will be retiring soon and may not have time for our board participation. So this show is all about developing that board with a youth perspective in mind, and how do we make sure that we get the right fit. With us today, we have two very wonderful women who have taken on this job of helping us figure that out, because this is a question that we're looking at the Philanthropy Show as well, to get a youth member on our advisory council. And we have Jennifer Yeagley-Russell, Executive Director of Community Tampa Bay, and Emma Makdessi, who is the Outreach Coordinator. And it's my pleasure to see her again, because it's been, gosh, half a decade ago that we worked together at Community Tampa Bay. And nice to have you two on.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Wonderful.
Well, this is, I turned to you when we were looking at this. This show is arising out of a past show in which one of our guests, who's also on our advisory council, Elizabeth Fowler with the Triad Foundation, had mentioned that she does have youth on her board. And I thought that would be a great thing. And Sharon and I talked about it, and I thought, but how do we do that? Mm-hmm. And then that made me think of my days at Community Tampa Bay, which is about inclusivity and diversity and respecting that youth and the age differences and all the benefits and skills that come with all sets and all ranges. Mm-hmm. So I want to first off talk a little bit about Community Tampa Bay and what that organization does with respect to all the differences and the varieties of people that are out there. So Jennifer, give me your spiel.
Yeah, sure. So Community Tampa Bay's vision is to end all forms of discrimination. And we do that by cultivating leaders to change communities through dialogue and cross-cultural interaction. And what that means is empowering youth to have hard conversations with other youth who don't look like them. Mm-hmm. And through that, we give them tools for building those interpersonal relationships that decades of research show reduce prejudice, mm-hmm. both interpersonally and in society as a whole. And so the next step to that then, of course, is once we've given them those tools, is to give them tools for leadership and advocacy in their own schools and communities so that they go out beyond our walls and promote that message of inclusion and are empowered to lead change.
And what I learned from that time frame at Community Tampa Bay were the young folks like Emma, who you kind of grew up through Community Tampa Bay.
I did.
When did you first become aware of Community Tampa Bay?
So it was, I was in 8th grade, I was getting ready to go into high school. So it was the summer of '02. I attended their program called Anytown. Mm-hmm. And completely changed my life around. And I came back as soon as I could in '04 as a counselor. Mm-hmm. And in other capacities, but one of them was being the youth board representative for CTB. And now I'm their outreach coordinator. Mm-hmm. So it's been years I've been with them. I think maybe 12, 13 years, something.
And you're closer to 30 now than you are to 20.
I am close. Thank
Not
you.
that close.
Not that close.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah.
But I think this is a testament, because that's and this is why I came to you guys for help with this, because this is really yes, you're teaching diversity, yes, you're teaching inclusion, but the leadership aspect is immense from that. Yeah. And the philosophies of inclusivity that a leader can take mm-hmm. and enhance his or her team in whatever leadership capacity they take on are immense. Mm-hmm. So you filled the role as a youth board member.
Absolutely.
For how many years?
It was a 1-year term.
It was a 1-year term.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And what were the challenges, starting from your perspective, being a youth board member on a, this is a board full of lots of people who are a lot older than you.
Right, lots of people who are older than me. I want to say the biggest challenge was, how do you draw me in? And I felt like drawing me in and making me be part of the board and be valued on the board was a little bit of a challenge. It's bridging that gap between me being a youth and them being adults who, it's really just about how do they bridge, and that was the challenge. That
is such a really good point, and I want to come back to that when we talk about that element of the nature of how boards are structured
Right.
now,
Right.
because that's probably something that might need to change
Right.
just for the communication of a board meeting.
Right.
So let me back up into why do we need to have youth on boards today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at Community Tampa Bay, we have long held the value of youth-adult partnerships, and that has been just embedded in all the work we do. And when I came on board about a year and a half ago, one of the things I loved learning was that we don't ever say youth are the leaders of tomorrow. We say youth are the leaders of today. And we believe that. And as you said, part of looking at diversity and inclusion is not just all the elements we're usually talking about, as a community, but looking at age and understanding that young people have something to offer as decision makers and as empowered voices in the decisions we make organizationally, with our programs, and even in our community as a whole. There's a perspective there that's often missing when we look at traditional leadership hierarchy and all the things that go into that, including years of experience and education level. And those are real elements, and we need to honor that. But what about that fresh youth perspective? Can we also bring into decision-making processes and allow that to enhance our work? And we have found at Community Tampa Bay that it does enhance our work.
Tell me about that, because I'm when I'm hearing you say this too, I'm thinking, gosh, I can hear nonprofits across the country going, well, here's our board structure. This is
Right.
our agenda. We have, the consent agenda we approve. We go on. But it's not. How do you open that up for youth participation? So tell me about the experience that you've had at Community Tampa Bay.
Well, I
with
think,
that.
for Community Tampa Bay, it's interesting because we've been in a time of transition. So one of our challenges, and I think this would be true for anyone trying to bring on youth into decision-making capacities like a board, is recruiting a youth member that's a fit for that role, that the timing is right. There are inherent challenges, like transportation barriers maybe. If you're looking at bringing on a 16, 17-year-old youth, they may or may not be driving or have parents who can drive them back and forth, or, so transportation's a barrier, location of meetings. So really looking at those original challenges is one thing. So we've been experiencing that as an organization, and yet still hold true.
You may have somebody who's interested,
Correct.
but can't make it to your
Right.
meeting.
So then it's like, how do we make it accessible? Can we do conference call-ins? How do we circle back to that person as we would any other board member who has to miss a meeting because they have another meeting or different things? So it's just understanding what those challenges are and being prepared to address them so that they're not barriers to bringing a youth in. So that's kind of like the process challenges I think that we have faced. Then there's the cultural challenge where as an organization, we culturally value the voice of youth. I think other organizations where there is more traditional hierarchy, that may be a bigger challenge. So how do you bridge the voice of your youth participants and your adults? And it's really about shifting paradigms around decision making.
This is a big area.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, and Emma, how did you, this is something that you touched on a second ago. When you've got a board that is used to a certain manner of decision making, in other words, they may talk, I don't even know how to describe this, they may talk at a level that they feel that your perspective as a youth doesn't have any applicable opinion, judgment, something around it. How do you voice that? I mean, and is that something a youth can do without having the actual board trained in a different way?
Yeah.
That's a big, you see what I'm saying? That's a huge area.
It is a huge area, and what you're talking about is, it's perspectives and how do we bring in the perspectives. And I think the first thing is we need to have that shift in the cultural shift in the leadership of the board. So it's, so I understand me sitting there as a youth, maybe what I have to say might not seem like its value or might not seem like it will apply to whatever the board is discussing. And I think what we need to do is focus on that board and how they view youth. I think it has to be that cultural shift. And saying, how do we bring, just really thinking and making it intentional, how do we bring in that youth? And so it is about maybe for a second putting aside what we know of a board to be or how it's structured, and think for a second, well, how do we bring in this youth? How do we bring in this person that's here that has a voice and value it?
And I think like with any board member, whether it's a youth or an adult, we recruit and bring board members into our conversations often based on skill set. So not everybody on my board has a background in finance, and not everyone on my board is going to be fully engaged in that discussion. Some are going to be more engaged in our programmatic discussions, some more on strategy, some more on fundraising. So it's just looking at that and saying, okay, so what does our youth member bring to the table? Perhaps they have been a program participant, which is what we do, is we bring in past program participants. Wouldn't they be the best people to inform how we talk strategically about our programs?
Speaking from their past experience,
Right.
having participated
Oftentimes
in it.
they can be forgotten. You know, I was representative, you know, from any town. I've been part of the program for years. And isn't that what, you know, we do? Isn't that part of our, you know, our organization? Oftentimes it is maybe forgotten or just we're really caught up in this is what a board is.
And you know, what you both just said too is it's applicable to, and I love the skill set example. You've got to find a youth member, just like you would any other board member, who has a certain set of skills that add value to your board that you need that help with. Whether my nonprofit focuses on homelessness or on poverty or on animals or on what, the perspective can be within the programs that you're looking at doing. It can be a numbers of things. And I think that's what you're saying is that the board, to be intentional about having a youth member on the board, you need to look at, okay, and how can we bring this person's opinion in? How can we get feedback from them with regard to this particular program? They may not be able to make a comment regarding your financial statement. Right? They may. They may be, you know, pre-math students or whatever.
Exactly.
But whatever their area is, I think it's to look at it that way. And I think that's where this goes awry, is that we tend to think of having a youth board member on a board means just bringing somebody in and having them sit there at the table. And nod and play their Game Boy or whatever the stereotype may be, right? And that's not it.
And from a process perspective, you know, really thinking about, okay, let's say you've gotten there culturally and you say, no, we want to value this and we do want to value that youth perspective. So putting that in action is a very different thing than having the value or the desire to do it. And I think from a process standpoint, you need two key things to happen. As you said earlier, it's looking at how your board is trained. So everything from onboarding new members, including youth, and what that looks like, and how to create the right foundation for having the youth-adult partnership on the board, and then your ongoing board training, and making sure that there is a constant reminder and engagement in valuing youth voice and giving tools for how that can be done, yielding the floor, engaging the youth by asking strategic questions. You know,
and having the board members, maybe one or two or three, or the executive director, et cetera, be intentional about, are we being inclusive of this member?
And the bridge, those allies on the board, just like an executive director looks to develop key relationships with certain allies, right? To know, I mean, that's something that we do as EDs, where all of our board should be allies, and sometimes one or two come up as our go-tos. I think similarly for a youth board member, you want to look at who are the allies on the board for this youth, those adults that bridge that dialogue.
So before we get into that, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, I want to really dive head full into that. How do we find the youth allies? How do we find the board member? How do we begin that search, and to try to help some of the nonprofits who are watching this really start to kind of create a pathway to getting a youth board member on. We're talking about youth on your boards on today's The Philanthropy Show. Taking a break right now, but we will be right back.
This show sponsored in part by
My Paper Pusher. Consider it done.
I'm Samantha Abraham, CEO of My Paper Pusher, with your financial tip of the week. How do you pick an accounting professional for your organization? Evaluate 3 areas when making that decision. First, their skills. While your bookkeeper does not need to know everything about accounting, they should be able to post and update journal entries, reconcile bank statements, and understand the basics of reading and explaining financial statements. Second, their experience. Your professional should have relevant experience working with organizations of similar sizes and backgrounds. Additional credentials, such as certificates of nonprofit financial management, add to their credibility of any professional. Third, their processes. A true professional will implement written processes and procedures to keep your books clean and make it easy for your organization and its financial team to review and get answers. Do your due diligence and find someone who you like and trust. The right accounting professional should have the skills, experience, and accountability to partner with your organization for the long term. I'm Samantha Abraham with My Paper Pusher, where you can consider it done.
Follow the Philanthropy Show on Facebook for behind-the-scenes action, polls, and commentary.
Welcome back to the Philanthropy Show, talking today with Emma Makdessi and Jennifer Russell from Community Tampa Bay about having a youth on your board. Not just being about, well, we just want to have youth represented as kind of like a yes, we're going to add to our diversity issue, but more about being inclusive and really getting that perspective. So I know from wanting to have a youth on our advisory council, just being transparent on the Philanthropy Show, that I have no idea where to even look. So how, number one, how do you recruit? I've decided, yes, I want to have that input. I want to somehow make sure that our advisory council sessions are focused on that, but where do I start looking?
When you start looking, you start looking within your organization. You start looking at what programs do you offer youth,
Okay.
and how do you bring in those youth that you've offered the programming with, and what kind of services are you providing? Are these leadership services? Are these resources? Are these, civic engagement kind of programs? So what programs? What are you offering the youth? And I think that's the first place is, hey, I have this group of youth, and I have them in this program, and we want to improve our organization. Let's start bringing them in that way.
And you look to, I know with board recruitment at Community Tampa Bay, we look at leveraging networks, as I'm sure any organization does. So maybe if you don't do youth programs, maybe you're doing senior services or your focus is on animals, it's then looking at your colleagues, your networks, so calling a fellow executive director and saying, hey, Jen, I know you guys serve youth at Community Tampa Bay.
Right.
We're looking at integrating a youth on our board. Do you have recommendations? And leveraging networks in the same way that you would if you're recruiting adult board members.
Because then your networks are also going to be looking at, okay, the youth that we have contact with, who would be interested in this kind of thing? Because again, it's not just about saying, okay, here's a youth,
Right.
let's put them on the board, right? Sorry, little bird. But it's really about finding that right youth member with the skill set. So, and I like that you both said that. What are your programs, or what is your intention? How do you want to have that feedback? And two, who do you have within your networks who are already connected with youth who might then be able to put those two together?
Right, and I even want to add, as a nonprofit, who are your volunteers? Who are your youth volunteers? And can you bring them onto your board? Because, they're part of the organization, they're working with the organization, they know the community. Can you bring them into your board as well?
And I think there needs to be a willingness to look at what we sometimes call non-traditional leadership. So I think the way boards and organizations are often structured are looking at these very traditional characteristics of leadership.
Yes.
So you hold certain positions in the community, you have a certain level of education, you have a certain reputation, and you're well known, your circles of influence are well known. And we all need that in our organizations to have the type of influence we want. But we also need non-traditional leadership, leaders who don't look like all of the other leaders in our community, leaders who come from different backgrounds and bring a diverse perspective, leaders who may have a lot to say, but they're introverts, and so they need a different type of engagement to bring out their ideas. All of these aspects. So I think looking at youth the same way is not just those specific hard skill sets, but what are some of those intangibles that define non-traditional leadership, and how can we need to open ourselves up to that.
You saying that makes me think about the generational conversations that we've been having, too, on the Philanthropy Show about how I think the tradition that we have for board members really is around the baby boomer era.
Right.
And we're trying to put each subsequent generation into that mold. Whereas very soon, within 10 years, we will have more millennials than we will have baby boomers. And we only have a 20% grouping of Gen Xers.
Right.
So we need to flex our tradition
Right.
in morph it or let it organically create into something that's a little bit more applicable to what's reality, instead of trying to continue to force change this. When we're talking about getting that youth and we have them on there, and now we're looking at maybe changing the structure of our boards, you'd also mentioned youth-adult partnerships. How does that work within a board scenario?
Yeah.
I'll throw it over to you.
Okay, so so there are different levels of youth-adult partnerships, and they start with sort of programmatic engagement. So at the lowest level, you've got, we serve youth in our programs. The next level is we provide a safe space for youth, and we do some back and forth listening and dialogue. Then there's a level of we work to empower youth leaders, and we're looking at them not just as beneficiaries of our services, but perhaps we're looking to develop some advocacy skills.
Okay.
Then we have the civic engagement piece.
And this would be kind of, sorry to interrupt you on that thought, grooming them into leadership
Right,
within your
right.
organization, grooming them into leadership on your board?
Right. So most organizations are somewhere in the we serve youth and we provide a safe space and we like to listen to them and have that interplay. On the other end of that continuum of the full youth adult partnership is that essentially they are looked to, regarded as, and engaged with as full partners in decision making in the organization, where and when appropriate. So again, just like it may not be appropriate for me to look to a certain individual in the organization to help make a decision about a financial, entering into a financial contract, it might be appropriate for me to look at a youth board member as a key decision maker in a direction that we're going to take on the program.
Right.
So it's knowing, but it is really, it is that simple and that difficult. It's making the decision.
Trial and error, really.
Right.
You're talking about, let's test something and see how this, how old were you when you were on the board, Emma?
Oh gosh,
16?
maybe.
Were you a
17,
teenager?
Something
Yeah.
like that. I was a teenager, yes.
And I'm thinking because I'm sure that different nonprofits would have different parameters as to what
Right.
they would consider youth. And depending on the programming that they have, youth may actually be middle school or junior high
Right.
and then some may be college
Right.
based. And this is a youth board member with voting rights at say
Yeah.
25 or something like that. But I think that's the important aspect. Whatever the parameters are that you're looking at, the intention is to get your board engaged
Yes.
in trying to figure out what that's going to look like.
Correct. And at Community Tampa Bay, I mean, we have, right now we're onboarding a new youth board member. We've been in transition, and we're bringing on a new teen youth board member in the next month
So
or so.
that's your parameters, teenage.
Right, a teenager, and for our teen, high school-aged youth, we look at participation in our program. So we are specifically looking for someone who has been an Anytown graduate or has been a participant in one of our other programs. We also have a dedicated slot for a young adult. So that is anywhere up to the age of 24, 25.
Okay.
And we intentionally recruit for that age range. And then interestingly, on our board, as we do our matrix of current board composition, we actually have far more millennials and Gen Xers
Wow.
than we do baby boomers.
Well, see, you're
And-
set up. You're geared.
Right, and we have
That's not a bad problem.
no, I mean, it's really
not,
interesting.
That's not a problem.
We have two individuals. In fact, my board chair is a graduate of the Anytown program from 1994.
Oh, that's cool.
So he's 20 years out. He owns his own business. He's an entrepreneur. He has networks and influence. He's
And
our board
still
chair,
engaged.
but he's a program person. So we at CTB have done that very, I would say quite well and very intentionally over the years, not without its challenges. But I mean, for us, it is just embedded in the culture, and I think it just takes time,
Yeah.
to make that a part of your
Part
culture.
of that culture Emma had talked on in the first segment early when you were talking about being heard on the board. And how do you, now that you are not a youth board member, but a grown up now, you're at that adult age. Yeah, you're not even qualifying for young adult anymore, I gotta tell you.
Gosh, thank you. Thank
Just
you.
aged out of that.
You just aged out. But seriously, how do you handle that as an adult, and what would you recommend, having been there, as an adult, to say, really pay attention, or how do you transition that as an adult, that thinking of there's just somebody sitting there?
Yeah, I mean, what Jen had mentioned is that allyship. It's now recognizing that you're in the position that, you, as a potential ally or as a person who is an ally for this youth. When I was in that place, if I didn't feel heard, if I didn't feel like I could really be engaged on the board, now I have this chance to reach out to the youth and say, hey, let's check in, let's talk. I think I have that power now to do that, to really fully engage them and say, I value your voice, what do you need? And then on another level, what responsibilities do you want? Asking them, how much responsibility do you want? What do you feel capable of doing? Check in with me.
I love that you just said that.
Giving them responsibility and not assuming that they can't handle something or
Right.
that they can.
Because you know what? All board members, well, hopefully all active and engaged board members want to have some kind of responsibility. They
Absolutely.
don't want to just show up to a meeting and then leave, because that's the quickest way that your board member is no longer a board member,
Right.
right? They're not engaged. So you'd want to have the same thing with your youth board members that you would with your adult board members. What is
Right.
it that you want to do? And I like that aspect that you were just talking about, Emma, about the youth-adult partnership, that if your youth, there's a safe space for that youth to go to someone and say, you know, I just feel like I sat there for 2 hours. Am I really a valuable component on this
Right.
piece, or do I just make your guide star rating look good?
Right.
You know, seriously.
And you know, we often have board buddies for incoming board members where they're paired up with an existing board member to help with the onboarding process, which I think is a great best practice. Same thing with the youth board member. Pair them with someone who has experience on the board but who they can relate to, where they can build a relationship and create that safe space. So that's another tool to help bridge that distance between perhaps the youth and the adult members.
Yeah, you don't want the youth to just be there. Just be there to be that youth. And then at the end of the meeting, it's, okay, well, thank you for being here.
Which is really about respect anyway.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine if we could transfer back 30, 40, and 50 years ago, I'm sure that there were the same conversations about, let's have races represented on our board.
Right.
Let's have gender represented on our board. We don't want to just bring on a woman so that she can smile and look pretty.
Right.
You know, this is really about integrating,
Right.
and we're at that next level now. Let's integrate. So age appropriately, what fits for our board and where that fits. I love having you guys on the show.
Thank
It's
you.
time, again, to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to play Truth or Care, which, as you know, is what is your heart's definition of philanthropy? Why do you do what you do? So we are going to take another short break, and we thank so much our studio sponsor, the Nonprofit Leadership Center of Tampa Bay, who gives us this wonderful virtual set space that we can have the Philanthropy Show. Take a break. We'll be right back.
And now a word from our studio sponsor.
Hello, my name is Lorraine Faithful. I'm the Operations Manager at the Nonprofit Leadership Center, where we teach nonprofits the skills they need to run their businesses successfully. I would like to take this moment to acknowledge and thank the men and women who volunteer for our nonprofits. According to a recent study, volunteerism provides an enormous social and economic value. Over 25% of Americans volunteer, and that represents 63 million people at a time value of $173 billion. Volunteering is the giving of talent, time, treasure, and ties or connections. Volunteerism is a great benefit to small and mid-sized nonprofits who often face budget constraints and also have an increased demand for their mission services. A great source of volunteerism comes from the influx of today's baby boomers who are looking to give back to their community, and they offer great experience, expertise, skills, and ties. But don't forget our young professionals. They are looking to improve, grow, enhance their skills and their networking. If you are looking for a nonprofit to consider using volunteers, these are some questions that you can ask yourself. What skills would help your organization but your budget won't allow for staff? What projects have you put off that a volunteer could complete or lead? What new software could a volunteer help to train your staff? What connections can your nonprofit offer a volunteer as a way of their networking? And how can your nonprofit use volunteers to be ambassadors for your nonprofit? Are you looking for a nonprofit to get involved in? One great resource on the internet is at greatnonprofits.org. At this website, you can browse by state, by city, and even by issue. And don't forget your local United Ways. At the Nonprofit Leadership Center, we offer a certificate in volunteer management. This is a training that addresses the challenges of volunteer managers. And of course, Nonprofit Leadership Center as a nonprofit utilizes volunteers in our symposiums and our conferences. Thanks again to all the volunteers. I'm Lorraine with the Nonprofit Leadership Center, where we educate, empower, and connect. Please visit our website at www.nonprofitleadershipcenter.com.
The Philanthropy Show is on demand every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at both thephilanthropyshow.com and YouTube/WatchMVVP TV.
Welcome back to the Philanthropy Show. We are with Emma Makdessi and Jennifer Russell, Yeagley Russell, I want to make sure I say that right, with Community Tampa Bay, talking about youth members on your board. And what a great conversation. That was just, I think that a lot of really good nuggets in this show to help people get launched down that, to help our nonprofits really be more inclusive with youth members. This is our segment where we talk about truth or care, and I'll let either one of you start. But it is, what is your heart's definition of philanthropy? Why do you do what you do?
I will start. So philanthropy is really, to me, it is an opportunity to put your money where your values are, to put your values into action. And it's a way that we can hold ourselves and our neighbors and colleagues accountable for the type of change we often talk about wanting to see in our community, but don't quite know how to make it happen. So we can all give, and it looks different for different people, but it's really connecting with your values and understanding that when you give financially to an organization that connects with your heart, that you are putting your values into action in a really meaningful way.
You're showing your insides.
That's right.
By saying, this is what I care about, and this is what I'm passionate about.
And money matters to nonprofits. It is important. It is, it's not a bad thing, and it is an extension of our values, and that is okay.
And it is a good way to show your personality. So I like that too. And it's you just kind of spoke to the outskirts of this is how the community can connect.
Yes.
And like you said, the accountability factor lets people know this is where I stand. This is who I am. I like that. Miss Emma.
Yeah, I think it's not about being afraid to give. It's saying, I can only give $5 this month. I can only give this amount. And it's not as much as somebody else, but it's about saying, I'm not afraid to give, and this organization values what I can give them. Even if it's just a little bit, because the little things add up.
Well, and you're a prime example. You live that, because it's not, and I don't mean to say anything about your pocketbook, but I'm not going down that road, Emma. But what I'm saying is you've given so much in the time frame from 8th grade to now. You've given back to this organization, even outside of money, in your time, in your commitment, now committed to it as a career in what you do. So you're really living that.
Yeah, it is about living it. It's about finding your passion and following your passion and saying, yeah, I'm going to give back because it's important to me.
Can you imagine doing anything differently?
Like in career?
Like career-wise?
I can't believe how lucky I am that I moved to Tampa a year and a half ago from California and wasn't sure what to expect. And I just never would have dreamed that I would have found and connected with an organization like Community Tampa Bay, which is the diversity and inclusion and everything that we do resonates with my deepest values personally. I feel so grateful to be in this role at this time and working alongside amazing people like Emma. And I cannot imagine. I'm incredibly grateful and very fortunate.
Yeah, and if you had asked me in 8th grade if I would be working for Community Tampa Bay and helping with the Anytown program, I'd be like, no way, that's not going to happen. So no, I think at this point in my life, I can't imagine doing anything else because it's always been such a significant part of my life.
It's at the core.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you both for coming on the show.
Thank
really
you so
loved
much.
having
It's
you.
wonderful.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank
Thanks.
you,
It's good to
Luann.
see you again, Emma.
Same here.
It's wonderful. Wow. Well, we're wrapping up the show for today, but every week, just love doing this. Love having guests like this. Love being able to do this show. Feel free to check out the other shows that we have online. We post a new show every Monday at 4, so we'll see you next time.
Do you have an idea for the Philanthropy Show? Contact us via our website or email us at tps@myvideovoice.com.